Welcome everybody. Appreciate you taking some time out for another PTP panel discussion. Today we are talking about one of the two most important things to our life sciences customers. We found in discussions that their most precious resource is time, and number two is money, and sometimes those go hand in hand. And so today we're having a conversation with the team from Leyton, really focusing on the discussion around how to free up some tax credits related to R&D efforts and analyzing some of the workloads that our life sciences customers are doing, particularly inside the cloud with data management and data analysis. Taking raw data into refined data and analyzing that. And so there's some, obviously there's some controls to that. And so today's discussion is really going to focus on, kind of what that means and what that is, and give yourselves an opportunity to determine, hey, is this something that might apply to you? And if so, what are the steps that you can go through to free up some of those additional dollars and hopefully kind of push those back into the R&D engine. So today we've got two fantastic resources with us, Brandon Carroll and Andrew-Dave Simpson, both from Leyton. We're going to have a number of questions kind of go back and forth for them, just to kind of give them an opportunity to share some of the discussions they're having with other customers. But wanted to start today and allow Brandon just to kind of, we've got just a couple visuals and just kind of shape up the landscape, what Leyton's doing, kind of their approach, and then we'll get into some of the nitty gritty. So with that, Brandon, you want to just kind of kick things off for us?
Sure. Thanks, Gary. I appreciate the introduction. It's great to be here, and it's great to have PTP hosting this. Basically, I'll just kind of walk you through just a high level before we hop into the meat and potatoes here. Leyton, just to give you guys a familiar setting with us, we're a global financial consulting firm with a focus on research credits and other types of federal, state incentives. We kind of have an operation going on in Europe, but in North America, our presence is in Boston, San Francisco, Montreal, and Toronto. And we're growing fast. Couple stats: we've got over 26,000 customers. We've done well over $1 billion in savings for a lot of different our clients. Almost at the 25-year mark. Well, like I said, I showed you we're in 12 countries and over 2,000 employees. So we're growing. There's a lot of advantage and incentives to take advantage in a lot of different countries, and we're excited to do this. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot more detail. What is the R&D credit? So I'm going to keep it super high level, but some of you might know, some of you don't. At the very most broad sense, it is a tool to reduce a company's income tax. That's technically what it does. There's a lot of ways that you can alter that and repurpose that money. You can also use it to reduce your payroll tax if you're more in a startup mode. It's a tool that rewards innovation. So if you're trying something new, if you're developing a process, a technique, or something, and it's rooted in a hard science, this is a tool, an incentive to reward a business for doing that. And what that in turn does is it accelerates that growth. It frees up your cash position to allocate that to other things in the business that are meaningful to help you get to where you want to go quicker. So I just wanted to paint that picture at a high level, and we'll jump in as we move forward. So yeah, that was kind of quick. Really good, nice quick overview of Leyton, what the R&D credit is. Obviously, as you said, Gary, we're going to really focus here on how this applies to not just the software space, but really the software cloud development space, which is kind of like a layer deeper, right? You can write software on your desktop and run that program. However, companies today in the world are using big servers and big cloud computing providers such as AWS to perform really large computation tasks, whether it's computing and processing large formats of data, or actually coding and doing applications on the cloud. And that's why we have one of our senior software specialists with us, Andrew-Dave Simpson from Leyton. And I'm happy to kind of dive into it. I think there's a good synergy here as PTP addresses kind of how to really tackle these large expenses that can grow to astronomical amounts. I think we've all seen that pretty quickly, even in the monthly. And so I think it's good that we're having this conversation.
Yeah, appreciate that. And so, exactly. So we're, for those of you that don't know us as well, PTP is we consider ourselves life sciences cloud enablers. So our belief is, as I mentioned before, time is of the most essence for most biotechnology companies. You've got a certain amount of dollars to take you to a certain point in your maturity as an organization and be able to prove out treatments and therapies. And so building out data centers and taking the time for that is obviously a thing of the past. The need is to get data really quickly into a place that you can do analytics and turn things up and turn things down from cost effectiveness extremely quickly. And when we say turn things up, sometimes that is, massive workloads using, high performance compute and a lot of resources for short periods of time. And so we're an AWS advanced consulting partner with the life sciences competency. And so our team's focus is really talking to data scientists at our organizations and the bioinformaticians that are trying to kind of really make decisions with that data and help them build an underlying infrastructure to be able to do that work. And so I think today's discussion really aligns well as when we're building those large workload architectures in the cloud, what of that passes the test, and how can we take a portion of those costs and look at those as applicable for the tax credits. And so that's the discussion that we'll have today. And certainly, with organizations as you're going through this process, we can certainly engage you with the Leyton team and have those conversations as we're talking about some of the architecture work that we do. So I think that's a great setup, Brandon. And Andrew-Dave, I think maybe we'll just go to you as the with the first question to try and start us off in this conversation. And what are the qualified research expenditures, and how do we include cloud service providers and things of that nature? Let's start there.
Awesome. Glad to be here. Thank you, Gary. So in terms of the qualified research expenditures, there are four main categories that should be available to any business, but specifically for software, one of them usually isn't as relevant. So the first one is for the W-2 wages. So that'll be your employees, anyone that you have on payroll. Then you also have any 1099 contractors, anyone that you're contracting out to do some work. Maybe it's some software work, maybe it's supporting work or management roles. And in case they're not exactly on a 1099 contract, if you have something like an invoice or some sort of record of payment towards the contractor, that can be included as well. The third category is what Gary mentioned, being the cloud service providers. And so these can be resources such as AWS, Microsoft Azure, Twilio, really any external computing power that you are paying to utilize or do testing with for your software development. And so one thing to keep in mind for the cloud service provider costs is that the costs that we can include are the costs that are related to development and testing. So the easiest way to think about it is like, say if your company separates the R&D or development environment from, say, like a live hosted environment, like with a software as a service application, then that can make it pretty easy to differentiate the costs that you can include. And yeah, so that's to say that the certain activities of just keeping the live hosting environment up and running are not what we're looking to include, but what you would expect as R&D, such as adding new features, testing those features, or performance capabilities such as reliability, scalability, speed, efficiency, etc., or even reducing cost. Those activities towards those same goals can still be included. And the last category is supplies. So this is the one that doesn't usually apply to software development costs, because these are for tangible resources that are consumed in the development of the R&D process. So say like in a biochemistry lab, if certain chemicals are being used in order to test if some reaction is working as they intended to, those types of costs can be included. But usually for software, there's no supply costs. So that answers that for the qualified research expenditures and the cloud service providers.
Fantastic. No, that's super helpful. So we've got a combination of, personnel costs, whether they're contractor or, full-time employees, as well as our cloud service provider. And I think, from our perspective, we'll see most of our cloud customers have obviously multiple accounts underneath their umbrella and typically resources that are allocated specifically to dev test will be separated from, ongoing production and things of that nature. There is probably some complication with certain workloads, but good to know how we can, more cleanly organize those, I think, to be able to prove out the costs and be able to apply those. So super helpful. Fantastic. So I think that's a really great start. Brandon, shifting gears to you. So we just talked about kind of four components. Can you explain the four-part test for tax credit?
Yeah, sure. So the four-part test is basically a way that the IRS is defining research, qualified research. And it's important to note that it's a lot more broad than someone might be used to in an academic or clinical setting. But at the highest level, we're looking for a new or improved business component. That's kind of part one. And that business component can be an array of different things. It can be a product, a process, a technique. And so obviously, when you're doing software, it can be a technique or a product or something like that. The second part of the test is that you need to be doing some process of experimentation, right? So you're doing basically you're evaluating different methods, different approaches, and this is something obviously that Andrew goes through a lot of. Basically, all of our clients kind of get briefed on how to look at this, how to look at their business through this lens, so that they can come up with different projects. And so that experimentation step is important. And then the fourth is that you need to be kind of eliminating uncertainty. So evaluating alternatives. It kind of goes hand in hand with that experimentation. Sometimes they're tied together, and Andrew might be able to offer more color on that. But obviously, if you try something once and it works, that's probably not going to be a qualified project. There has to be some type of challenge and step-by-step trial and error effort, so that you come out on the other side having either developed something new that's successful, or you might have failed as well, which is a good point to make, that if you fail in anything, it's still qualified, right? Because you had to go through this process. I think we all kind of understand that you have to fail many times before you get something, just how you want it. And then the fourth element, which sometimes people call out up top, is that everything that we look at that's qualified has to be rooted in a hard science. And in what we're looking at right now, that's computer science. But anything that we're looking at needs to be, rooted in engineering, chemistry, physics, biology, really those types of hard sciences versus the soft sciences. And Andrew, if I missed anything there, if you want to add anything, feel free. That's kind of the general overview I like to give, but a lot of times the technical consultants dive a little deeper.
Yeah, so that's generally it. One additional thing was just sort of tying with the technical uncertainties. So the success of the R&D activities would have to rely on one of the hard sciences, such as biological science, physical science, computer science, or one of the fields of engineering. And during our study process, we gather certain key details in order to substantiate each of the four-part tests. That way we know what details we need to still gather and what details we already have. And for the technological and nature tests, usually it's the easiest to satisfy. We just gather details such as the technology stack, any specialized technologies that might be used under development. Say if there's anything special like a special type of database, hierarchy, or AI or machine learning, or any other specialized technology that makes your product either unique or something separated from other competition on the market. And yeah, that really ties with the technical uncertainties. to really just highlight the uncertainties, or sometimes in software industry, it's called technical risk or technical debt. We want to highlight the details of technical risk or challenges relating to the software's function or a functional quality improvement, such as, like I mentioned before, reliability, performance, scalability, etc. So yeah, that's what I would add to it.
No, that's really helpful. So that whole process of experimentation. So it's clear that, the majority of the organizations I think that we're working with, especially these early stage biotech companies, they're scientists in the lab, they're continuously trying to prove out treatments. I don't think that they probably haven't gotten to the point of it's defined yet. It's, so that's kind of an ongoing process, but it's also clear that there are very specific tests that you all need to go through and that they'll need to justify to be able to allocate these costs appropriately for the tax credit. And so I think what's eye-opening to me is that there's a lot of opportunity here, but it's going to take people like you that have the right experience and do this day in and day out to be able to justify, which costs to qualify for the credit. So, really helpful. And I think with that, Andrew-Dave, the next step would be internal use software, because I know that that's one thing that there's a component of there. And what is it, and how would we include that, if possible, into the R&D tax credit?
Same way that Brandon just mentioned, business component as being one of the tests, and software being a type of business component. Internal use software is sort of like a subcategory of software, where the software is not client-facing and it also isn't interacting with other third-party software. So just a little bit of history is that before 2015, there wasn't much detail or description or legislation on internal use software. It was generally just excluded. But in 2015, there was updates to the legislation, adding more specificity to types of software, and including internal use software that can be included into the claim. And so the guidelines sort of summarize to what I'm about to explain. So how I just mentioned, not client-facing and not interacting with third-party software. So internal use software is, you can think of it as something that's being used for general administrative purposes. So this doesn't necessarily have to be directly tied to the regular R&D that you may or may not be doing for like your business product. This could be like a back-end software just for your company to improve some sort of process or workflow within your like one of your company's branches. And this could be for financial management, such as like accounting, record keeping, inventory management, budgeting and forecasting, or financial reporting and tax. It can also have to do with human resource management, with hiring and training employees, payroll and benefits, as well as it can also have to do with support services, with data processing, facility management, marketing and security services, and sometimes it can even be related to the actual R&D that you're doing, such as like a utility tool, etc. For internal use software to qualify, it technically has 3 additional criteria that are on top of the 4-part test. But upon like evaluating the business components and how software developments usually go, the first 2 of these are usually satisfied if it also satisfies the 4-part test anyways. So the first additional criteria is that the software needs to meet a higher threshold of innovation. And this just means that the company needs to be going for a measured improvement to one of their internal workflows or processes, such as like if this backend software can help cut your record keeping time in half, then that's a qualified, that would substantiate measured improvement. So something measurable, not something that's more like, oh, we like this better, as like a preferential design, if that makes sense. The second is that it needs to incur a significant economic and technical risk. So that just means that you need to have invested either resources like time or money into the development. And the last one is that the software shouldn't be commercially available, but that's sort of a given, given that it's internal use. So I mentioned it was the first two, but it's the way I ordered it. The last two are the ones that would be sort of given if it passes the 4-part test anyways. So the one that we focus on is just meeting that measurable improvement test.
That's great. So, so that changes things a little bit. So instead of us being just laser focused on only the technologies and the services that are specifically around the lab or the science or the data analytics, now we're talking about some of the things that are supporting the organization administratively. To the point, to the extent that they qualify for the various tests that we kind of laid out earlier. So, so that's where, again, I as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, okay, you know, it's pretty challenging for organizations to be able to have this level of expertise and understand this on their own, and that's really where, you know, I think Leyton can come in and help provide that visibility and the analysis for them, and again, free up some additional dollars. So that explanation is really helpful. There's, you know, an additional question. You guys tell me if we've covered some of this before or not, but what activities qualify for the credit? And then, you know, maybe if so, what are those, or some of the high risk activities that we just people need to be aware of what might be disqualified or what might not? Either of you, whoever, you know, wants to kind of grab that would be great.
Yeah, so some of the high risk activities, so there are a handful of exclusions to research to R&D, and this is really just to snuff out certain activities that may either be like on the fence or more not as technological in nature in the first place. So things such as marketing research, efficiency surveys, duplications of existing business components, adaptation to like specific like contracted requests, and some other exclusions such as like the research being funded. So activities such as those wouldn't be included into the claim, and usually they wouldn't qualify for the 4-part test anyways. So those are some exclusions specifically. And for the high risk categories, they're not all necessarily automatically excluded. The reason they're high risk is that they're high risk for not qualifying, meaning that these activities usually don't qualify unless because they have these concerns of not being as technological in nature. And so some of these high-risk ones include maintenance of existing software applications, software application configuration. So that would be, you know, using an existing software and just using the options within it. Reverse engineering, performing studies or similar activities to select vendor products, bug detection or detecting bugs in the software. Then there's modifying an existing business component to make use of newer or existing standards or devices, or to be compliant with another vendor's product. Then there's things such as sort of rehosting, other activities that reuse the existing software or third-party software to take care of all of the functionalities involved with the software development. But to the extent that these concerns can be addressed where the software wouldn't normally be have a technical uncertainty or rely on the principles of computer science, where I draw a baseline is If you can tell me how the software development is adding, say, a new software functionality or enhancing a functional quality, such as the performance, reliability, scalability, etc. That's where we have something to start detailing and starting to include into the claim.
Super. No, that's fantastic. So a lot to think of, and I think a great way for us to kind of close this out, at least for this discussion. Brandon, just what do the engagements look like? What do what do our customers or our life sciences clients need to consider, or how do they get involved with Leyton, and what are kind of the first steps of the process, just so they can start to decide, hey, is this something for me that makes sense?
Absolutely. So the easiest way that we take the approach on is just by having an initial assessment. We gather some financials. Typically, it's tax returns, payroll, and P&L statements. We do some analysis on that. And then we set up a phone call for about 45 minutes to an hour with someone like Andrew, Dave on the call, representing the technical side of things, as well as a financial person there as well. We kind of run through kind of our review, walk them through the 4-part test like we've talked about and how it applies to their business, and basically turn it over to them to kind of start to brainstorm some projects that might apply to their business. And so that initial assessment is something that we want to have before we really hit the gas on the project, to make sure that everybody's aligned on there are enough projects here, the work's qualified. Is a bulk of the work outsourced with contractors? Sometimes that can be a great expense to include, but sometimes the service agreement might not support that, and so there's usually some additional things we want to review. So that's really the first step. I think you dropped a meeting link there in the chat, so people can set up a time to have a discussion. That would just be kind of a discussion to see if it's worth taking a next step. Our business model is a smaller percentage, typically 20-25% of the total credit that we qualify, and so that pays us for our time to author this technical report that Andrew talked about. That's essentially what we're delivering is a comprehensive technical study that substantiates your claim. It backs it up if it's ever questioned by an authority. It does have a dual purpose, though. You not only want to have that to back you up, but it also serves as a blueprint or almost a guide for how you might want to approach activities in the future. If these activities qualified you for a good substantial credit, then how do I apply that methodology to new approaches for the years to come, and so that you can grow your credit year over year? In 2015, they made this permanent. So this is an evergreen tool to reduce your income tax year over year. And if you're pre-profitability as a company in the first 5 years, you can use the credit to reduce your income tax, or sorry, your payroll tax. And so that's a way for a startup operating in the first 5 years to at least feel some relief. And so we're going to guide you either way. And if we find that there's no research, we can both walk away with no obligation. We do want to make sure that it's kind of like a zero risk approach, so that we give the client a thorough evaluation, and everybody has the opportunity to kind of make sure that this is kind of worth pursuing, that there's vetted interest on both sides and there's a mutual benefit. So that's really kind of the step process. It would be having a conversation with myself, basically, and then taking the next step, having an initial assessment, and going from there.
Who would you recommend be on the client side for that initial assessment? Is it finance, IT, science, or what's the best mix to have that conversation and kind of extract the information you want to?
Sure. So typically, the conversation starts with the CFO or a financial person at the business, to kind of so that I can understand their tax position, understand some basically high level financials. They usually have a basic understanding of the technical function. Sometimes that will stem into a follow-up call with a technical person to confirm maybe if there was some uncertainty about whether they're actually doing qualified work. But on that initial assessment, if the finance person wanted to be there, it was great. We also really need either whether it's a chief data science person or a chief technology officer, someone really who's kind of heading up engineering and can speak on behalf of the team and the technical work that they're doing. What we're really trying to do, what Andrew's trying to do, is build a good comprehensive list of projects. That is how we base everything off of the credit calculation. If you start with $1 million in wages and half of that team's time is going towards qualified work, well, then you shrink that down to 500,000, and that's kind of the number that we work on. And so based on how many projects can take up a year, that's how we gauge the allocation of everyone's time and also the allocation of costs when we're looking at cloud computing costs.
Super. So that's, I think, really helpful. So, initially assessment, we talked about, we'll drive that with finance, get the CTO or data science involved, follow up with, that kind of review call where you guys can walk through and see, discuss that a little bit more and see if it makes sense. You've got the technical report that you ultimately provide, et cetera. So I think real clean and real clear makes a lot of sense. And then in terms of, very low risk, I think on low to no risk on the biotech side, it's simply, hey, let's start with a conversation. If it passes the initial review from your team and you dig in a little later, then, their greatest opportunity is just, a sharing of some of the credits. And that's certainly a win for them. So I think this has been enlightening, fantastic. And obviously, the reason organizations will work with an organization like Leyton is there's a lot of detail underneath the hood, as Andrew-Dave really articulated, very specific tests and understanding of, obviously, of the law, the tax law, to be able to make sure that, you're keeping yourself risk-free, but allocating, getting access to the greatest amount of credit as you possibly can. So, so we'll be certainly sharing the links out as an on-demand webinar that we'll be posting in the next week or two. So we'll have people be on the lookout for that, and we'll certainly share that. And as we do, we'll make sure that the links are available, as well as obviously the PTP team, as we're engaging with CFOs for our biotech customers. We'll be making sure that the team's having this conversation. So great discussion. Really appreciate both of you, Brandon and Andrew-Dave, for taking the time with us this afternoon if there are any questions going forward, we'll certainly answer those and redirect to the team. But thank you very much for the time today. I think it's been a great discussion and really appreciate. And to everybody that attended, thanks as always for being part of one of our events. We've got more coming up. We'll be having a data security conversation in the next month, and then part 2 of our data management with the Quilt and AWS team. So those will be coming out, being on the lookout, ptp.cloud for those events. With that, Andrew-Dave, Brandon, thanks for your time. Attendees, thanks for joining us, and you guys have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate the opportunity.
You guys.
Bye-bye.